I don't know how to introduce you now because I heard you have stripped yourself of a certain label after years of dedication to the libertarian movement, that you're no longer calling yourself a libertarian due to negative associations with how the Libertarian Party is going. So let me ask you, introduce yourself, and how do you describe yourself now?
Yeah, I describe myself as a liberal, not a libertarian, mainly because I think the word libertarian has become extremely bastardized and co-opted. I'm a liberal in the traditional sense, in the classical sense. And I'm sure this is what we're going to get into in the show a little bit more. As somebody who's spent about 10 or 15 years working, what I'd like to say as I feel like I've tried to be a good faith actor that's focused on building a viable alternative to the two major parties. That's been my motivation. Something that is a generally classically liberal movement, like basically smaller government, individual rights, international cooperation, free trade, those types of things. Apparently, that's no longer what the word libertarian means. It's become, at least in the last year, I don't know if you picked up on this still. I'm it seems that word is becoming to mean something completely different. It's becoming to mean things like being pro-secession and national divorce, thinking that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and there's a lot of anti-LGBT stuff coming from major Libertarian Party brands. I think true libertarians are classical liberals, and so I think that for those of us with that political persuasion, it's important to identify ourselves correctly, and that's one of the reasons why I've abandoned using that term and focused back on the roots, if that makes sense.
Now, chat, I understand that. Now, you got number one. You guys love libertarian bashing, but we're not going to be doing that today. Number one, because he's just switched teams, right? He just went from team red to team blue, right? So we gotta respect the defector over here. We gotta respect him for that.
And it's worth noting too, Dylan. Like, what I feel like one thing I'm coming to terms with is that my definition of libertarianism is very much in line with. It's not in line with what that word's become, and the party has become a real joke in the last couple of years, even more than it was before. And so, yeah, I think that's what you wanted to talk about a bit, was kind of how we got
I just wanted to be clear that we are not going to have a debate about why Social Security is a gift from the heavens. We're not going to debate that today, but I'm sure we could have an extensive discussion about, well, LBJ should be crowned our first king. But we're not going to be having that discussion today. Instead, we're going to be talking about the future of the Libertarian Party, the history of the Libertarian Party. And so today, I just wanted to start this out with saying, why are you leaving the Libertarian, I guess you could say, movement? I don't think you're leaving the freedom movement, but you're leaving, I guess you would say, the Libertarian movement, or at least that labeled type of movement.
Yeah, so that's a big question that goes back several years. So, I came into politics when I was 18, 19, and I was motivated by, to be honest with you, my positions have evolved so much in the last 10 or 15 years. I was motivated by ideas of like limited government fiscal responsibility, the traditional kind of Tea Party lines. Many of the people that I liked when I was 18 at the time, which was like 2011, 2012, I no longer have any respect for whatsoever. But over the years, I was very anti-Trump, right? So I thought Trump was an authoritarian in 2016. I thought he was sitting America down the wrong path. I left the Republican Party in 2015-ish, joined the Libertarian Party, wanted to focus on, again, as we talked about, I wanted to build a legitimate alternative. That was the whole thing that motivated me. I just wanted a viable electoral alternative that could challenge the other two parties and maybe like achieve in doing some stuff, streamlining the government, free trade, international cooperation, maybe less surveillance. There's a million different things that we could go into. But over the years, the Libertarian Party, and I put this out in a thread, which I think is one of the things that kicked off this whole conversation, there's been a concerted effort within MAGA and within the Republican Party to effectively try to hijack, infiltrate, co-op, and destroy the Libertarian Party. And the reason why I believe this is all alleged, right? And I outlined this in my thread, is because the Libertarian Party in 2020 and in a different way in 2016 has this tendency in electoral politics to kind of like, it covers the spread in elections. So as you know, in many swing states, 1 or 2% can tip it one way or the other, right? And the Libertarian Party, the Republicans have hated it for a very long time because the Libertarian Party hits them on their right flank, right? I mean, you're not good enough on guns. You know, we want to make sure we want to abolish all gun control. You know, you don't actually want to cut the budget, that kind of stuff. And so the Republican Party's had a problem with it for a while, but there's an anecdote that, you know, Trump was watching what happened in 2020 when Joe Jorgensen, in I think it was 3 swing states, covered the spread, and he saw that as a tipping of the election towards Joe Biden. I think the state was Wisconsin.
Could I ask you quickly, do you think that this assumption that if you lose the Libertarian Party as an electoral option, that it would necessarily bring over the, like, a lot of these things where they cover the spread, you would have to assume that basically every libertarian vote would go for Trump, that none of these people would stay home, none of these people would vote, like, write in Santa Claus, or would write in, like, John McAfee or something else, you know, some libertarian option, or that they would, you know, possibly break for Democrats. I mean, some people I know that are libertarians because they think that the Republicans are too theocratic, or they want to control women's bodies, even though they're for free, like lower taxes and stuff like that.
Yep. And by the way, I'm in a similar boat. Like I've never in my entire life considered voting for a Democrat until this year, and looking at it, and we can get into that later. But I will say, I do not agree with the premise. Right. Like, I don't think that that's the way electoral politics works. I don't think that, like, it's a guarantee that if this candidate wasn't on the ballot, the 1.5% in Arizona that went to Joe Jorgensen was going to go straight to Trump. I don't think that's the case. But actually, you know, I think it's very nuanced. There's people, as you mentioned, that stay home. They don't break the right way. And I think the Libertarian Coalition for a long time has been this very weird mix between, I always find, this is the anecdote I like to use, because the libertarian movement brings in 2 types of people. From my experience as doing this for over 10 years, it brings in bleeding heart, you know, pro-liberty. I want the world to be set free. A lot of these people are motivated by, like, the drug war or abortion, right? Those things. And then it also brings in this whole kind of, like, fuck you, I want to get my own. I want you, keep you off my property. I want the government to be abolished. And within that category of these kind of give me my own people, there's also a category of like straight up neo-Confederates, secessionists, as you see with Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, white supremacists and anti-Semites. And it's been a strange thing because, you know, again, we could shit with chat on the Libertarian Party all night, but the Libertarian Party has never, at least not in my lifetime, been driven by that category, that like very illiberal, I would say, group of people. It's traditionally been run by these kind of bleeding heart types. That's the way it's been run for a long time. You know, like they denounced January 6th, they denounced Charlottesville, you know, they were the first party to be like pro-LGBTQ, you know, like the first party to be pro-LGBT. And so the thing that shifted in the last 2 years is effectively that, like, what was a kind of a uncomfortable minority got a ton of money somehow and took over the party and basically made it very clear to anyone else that wasn't part of that category that you're not welcome. We don't want you here. Get the hell out. And you know, and in my thread, which we can get into later, I do believe that a lot of the funding came from MAGA, and it was driven by this. I mean, there are allies, they're natural allies. Like if you're an illiberal, right, you reject liberal principles, the principles that underpin Western civilization. I mean, that's what Trump is. He I mean, he literally praises Putin. He wants to pull the U.S. out of NATO. He rejects free trade. He was like spent more money than anyone in history. He wants to sick the police on protesters, right? We remember what he did during the BLM riots. And so they're natural allies, like that illiberal category of these paleo kind of libertarians. I don't think they're all evil people. I think some of them are misguided, but I will tell you that there are a ton of those people in that coalition that are some of the worst of the worst. And so, yeah, I mean, but I agree, like they're not going to break. And I say that because that 1% was made up of a bunch of different types of people. And I know a lot of them go different ways or just don't even vote. So yeah, long answer to that comment.
So before we get I guess I mean, we can go straight into like the neo-Confederate stuff, or we can go straight into like the those kind of elements that I guess we could say is no bueno. Um, but I think I'd rather start with the kind of inciting incident to all of this before we get into those kind of those niche movements that are part of the libertarian movement, Mises Caucus,
Yep.
etc. Trump is speaking at the Libertarian Convention. Am I correct in saying this?
Yeah,
This is a thing that's happening.
He's headlining the Libertarian Convention, and so is RFK Jr., and so is Vivek Ramaswamy, apparently as of 2 hours ago. And we found out about that on Breitbart this afternoon.
Can I ask you a question? They're headlining it. Is the Libertarian presidential candidate headlining the event?
From what I understand at this moment, the Libertarian presidential candidate is not even on the agenda.
Wait, okay. So I heard this might be true, and I didn't believe it, so I wanted to ask you. But as of right now, and this could change in the future, but they booked the main an opposition candidate, somebody who's running against their candidate, to speak at their convention before their own candidate for president.
That's right.
If they're going to invite them at all.
Right now, the narrative from their side is, oh well, the agenda's in flux and we're going to add them. But I think the key is like he's not debating. Even if he was debating, I mean, who the hell cares? It's like you're taking the opposition and you're using party resources to give them a platform at your party. It's incredibly stupid. It's short-sighted. If it's coming from a place of good faith, it's just lunacy. You know what I mean? It's like the Democratic National Convention using their resources to invite Trump to. It's the same concept. It's like it just doesn't make any sense at all. But he's not debating anymore.
What confuses me is like, the libertarians need to find ways to get themselves on as many platforms as possible. They need to find ways to get people in front of them. So how are you going to take your convention and then make the big headliner the people you're running against? Like, I maybe the argument's you bring more viewership, but they would be viewership for the person who's running against you, not people who are going to be joining your party.
And I laid this out because there's a connection, there's a money trail in the sense of like there's a ton of funding coming into this PAC to support it. By the way, I mean, Dylan, I've spent so much time in the Libertarian Party. There's not a lot of money in the Libertarian Party, right? So the fact that there was a minority PAC able to raise, I think it was like $500,000 during the 2022 FX cycle, that's insane. Like that's not normal in Libertarian Party politics. So my assumption is, again, there's a malicious intent. The goal is to turn the Libertarian Party into a satellite of MAGA authoritarianism. I mean, that's the goal. And it achieves that goal because that's what all the headlines say. You're going to have a libertarian logo with Trump giving a keynote in front of it, right? In the minds of the public, the damage has been done. That's the headlines. Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump speaking at the Libertarian Party convention. So it makes no strategic sense whatsoever. I mean, if you're running if you're running an opposition party, it makes no sense. If you're running a party that's supposed to enable or help the other side, then it does make sense because that's exactly what they're doing. You know.
I mean, if you wanted to get rid of the quote unquote spoiler effect, without literally, I guess, just abolishing the Libertarian Party, I guess this would be the closest way to do it. Would be like, hey, here's the candidate. Isn't the candidate cool? Isn't the person we're running against cool? Let me give him like an hour to tell you why he should be president and not our guy should be president.
That's literally what the press release that's basically what the press release said. It said something like, I'm here to tell libertarians why they should vote for me. And I'm like, so you're using that went on an LP press release. I mean, it used time in the party to tell you.
Why not make it a debate? Like, I mean, Trump. I mean, I don't even know if there's going to be a presidential debate this year. That's a real question because of just how much division there is, how much hatred between the two candidates, how old both candidates are. I mean, wouldn't this be a great time to kind of like hold Trump's feet to the fire in a way that the media has not been very good at doing? At least, I mean, from the idea of like real political opposition, and doing it from the pro-liberty position would be an area where I feel like he's vulnerable. Like if someone went up there and say, why'd you ban bump stocks? Like from a pro-gun position, how did that help? How did that help? Why, if you agreed it's a mental health issue, why didn't we do something on mental health? Why did you do the policy that you say doesn't work? Like there'd be so many different ways you could go after him, and they just we're just gonna give him like a pillow and a milkshake and say welcome to the party.
I mean, first of all, he wouldn't accept that. I mean, this whole thing was his idea. So from what I understand, and I can dig this up after the fact
It was
for you
Trump's
if you want
idea.
validation. Yeah, so the Trump campaign reached out to the chair, Angela McArdle, and from what I understand, she unilaterally accepted the invitation without even the approval of the board. There's actually conversation threads that I can show where they're debating right now, because it's all public, like their conversation back and forth, where they're like, hey, the Convention Oversight Committee, which is the body in the party that's supposed to make decisions on speakers, never even reviewed or signed off on this. So she got an invite and unilaterally accepted it. And then she went out just a couple days after and said, hey, I think that Donald Trump, is the better candidate. We need to defeat Joe Biden, basically. And she's been very explicit about that.
So it's not okay. I've been feeling this way for a bit. I'm just gonna be blunt about it. It feels like the Libertarian Party is moving away from the idea of let's try to win elections and provide an alternative, and more like we're basically a caucus. We want to become a caucus within the Republican Party, or we want to be like a caucus outside of the party, but kind of operating within the party. I've seen all these local chapters like endorsing and pushing like Republican candidates over Libertarian Party candidates. Even when there's a Libertarian trying to actually run in those elections, they just like say, well, ignore that because he doesn't have a chance anyway. I mean, like it's my job to tell Libertarians they don't have a chance. It's not their jobs to say we don't have a chance. If they say it, then no one's ever going to take them seriously, ever.
Yeah. And well, again, as somebody like myself who's been motivated by the electoral element of this, like, again, my goal is, at least it was for the last 10 years, was I want a viable electoral force. I want a party that has ballot access in all 50 states that can exert some influence. That is exactly the mindset. It's not only defeatist, but again, I'm convinced it's malicious. The Libertarian Party of Colorado, for example, and I think it was their chair, Hannah Goodman, who now, by the way, is running for vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, literally was like the model for this. There was a video of a guy by the name of Dan Ward who I believe he ran for state house in Colorado, and he was one of the most successful Libertarian candidates in the party ever. And he tipped the election. He got a significant vote margin. He tipped the election. I think he tipped them towards the Democrats, which, by the way, I have no issue with that concept. Like, if you're going to run, if you're not going to be true, like the Republicans are going to be truly true to their values, they deserve to lose to Democrats. That's my whole idea. But after he ran, shortly after this, they drafted a plan with the GOP of Colorado, basically agreeing that they would kick candidates off the ballot if the GOP candidate signed this really convoluted pledge saying that they would endorse libertarian ideas. So the whole model was, we saw what happened. You screwed us in a race. And the response from the chair of the LP Colorado was, okay, well, we'll just kick future candidates off the ballot if you sign this document that says you agree with us. And Dan Ward specifically went in front of a committee in Colorado, and he had a quote that I thought was the most powerful thing. He said, our campaign was forced to stay hidden, not from Republicans and Democrats, but from the Mises Caucus, because they infiltrate campaigns and they destroy them. So, I mean, that's a quote from an LP candidate, one of the most successful ones in the party. And that, again, speaks to this broader trend of, I think
he's like one of the few libertarian candidates that I know about, which is, it says something.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And it's a defeatist mentality, and it's also complete lunacy. Like, if you're if you want to go do activism, well, first of all, if you want to...
Actually, when I think about it, wouldn't this mean that once a libertarian candidate got any traction, like he started getting 5-6% in the polls, immediately, using this mentality, the incentive would be to shut it down immediately so it doesn't interfere with the Republican. So this sets up a party to lose by default without even an effort every time, when you also have the institutions against you, which means it's literally just a complete acceptor of doomer. It's just like almost like an admission of defeat. Might as well help the other guy.
Exactly. And it's complete lunacy. And if you want to go do activism, or I guess they're pushing this defend the guard legislation, go start a 501c4, go start a 501c3, go do your activism. But it's either insidious or misguided. Like, it's either malicious or misguided. And the leadership is doing this over and over again. I mean, one of the first things the LNC did when they took over the party after they removed the plank condemning bigotry was they wrote a $10,000 check to a Republican candidate. I'm telling you, the whole model here is to try to destroy the LP's electoral influence. I'm convinced of that. Like every single thing they've done since they've taken over have resulted in that outcome.
Well, let me ask you about the hard numbers then. What has membership looked like after the Mises Caucus takeover and during the reign of the current chair? I believe his name is McCardle?
McCardle, I think.
Sorry.
Yes. You can call her McCardle, though. I like that more. So the outcomes. Let me give you the outcomes. 35% of dues-paying members have left the party.
35% of due-paying. That means that would be 35%.
Yeah, almost half, and that number I think has increased since all these announcements. Is probably going to reach 50% by the time the convention. And it's worth noting that that's a big number.
Those are due-paying members. So these are the people who keep the lights on.
That's right. And the party operates like the party. One of the best things the party had for a long time was literally tens of thousands, 20,000 individual members that were paying dues on a recurring basis. It was this model where they had all these activists across the country. You'd get this little card in the mail and you'd get this LP newsletter. And it was a model where they got these small dollar donors to basically fund it. So they had some big whales, but it was really like a members-led org. All those people have rejected them and they don't even really care about bringing it back. But that's not even the bigger picture because, yeah, sure, 35% of the members have lost, but revenue is at a 30-year low. So it's lower than it was even in the 90s. And they've also got a like $300,000 hole in the budget right now because they've made some, there was a contract negotiated for the convention that's upcoming before the current LNC took over. And because all the members basically left the party, a lot of people are boycotting the convention, or they're basically doing what many people, they're staying off site. They're not joining the room block. They're not buying convention packages. They're literally getting an Airbnb and driving in just to screw them over, right? Because of many of the things that we could get into. So they've got this massive liability on their balance sheet. The only asset the party had before they took over was the crown jewel of Nick Sarwark's, the former LNC chair's, long-term as chairman, which was this paid off office in DC. It was paid off. It's there.
I heard that. So did they sell off the office, if I remember correctly?
That's what they're doing now.
They're selling off. To be clear, they're a national party or attempting to be a national party, and they're getting rid of their office in DC. But at the same time,
they're getting a line of credit against it, and they've closed it down. Yes, but keep going.
Okay, well, if they cloned against it, get a line of credit against it, this is the type of stuff that gambling addicts start doing, right? This is not the type of stuff that your political party should start doing. But at the same time, they're hosting like Rage Against the War Machine. They're hosting these events, which are big money sinks. And from everything I heard about it, I was at the event. I would say that the crowd that they attracted did not bring membership to the party. I've heard from people afterwards that didn't bring in a lot of new membership. It didn't bring in a lot of new money, and that the attention they got was widely negative. I mean, all the images I saw of the chair of the party, of McCardle, was of the Russian flags behind her flying as she was speaking as an anti-war protest, before bringing on stage a bunch of pro-war, pro-invasion people. And it could have been even worse if they ended up not canceling the convicted pedophile Scott Ritter, who was going to come, who's also pro-invasion and does propaganda for the Russian government. Still got Jackson Hinkle, still got these other propagandists, but what are they getting from these events? What is the positive from, hanging out with the LaRoucheite gang, and like what's the bonus here?
There is no bonus. There's no, well, I mean, like objectively speaking, we could go through the outcomes even more because there's so many more metrics I could go over where there's not a single metric from what I understand that's up. At one point, Twitter engagement was up, and I'm pretty sure that's down now. But
that's the most important metric, of course.
Yeah, that was something.
I think it was Joshua Collins who proved that in his great race for office, an old meme.
So Rage Against War was a crazy one, man. Because I think you and I talked about this, a year ago when this all came down. Like I put out a whole thread about how it was obviously not an anti-war protest. This was before it actually happened and it became big. Caught a lot of shit for that in the party, and everyone, there was a 501c4 started, okay. by Nick Brana and Angela McArdle. That's the chair of the People's Party, which I guess is this like tanky party or
Yeah,
something.
I call it the Podcasters Party.
The Podcasters Party. All right. So it was Angela and Nick Brana. She started this thing, and apparently they raised like $100,000, right? I mean, that's at least what I've heard. And I think she came out and said that it cost 20 or 30 grand, and none of that money was accounted for. Like to this day, no one knows where it went. No matter how many times people ask, it's like literally just disappeared. I mean, I'm convinced, I don't know about where you're at with this whole thing, that there were a lot of like shell companies like that were set up in the days after the Ukrainian invasion, like in early 2023. Because I remember these anti-war protests that were like objectively pro-Russia protests that were happening everywhere. I remember hearing about them in Australia and Europe and the US, and they were getting funded and they were getting all this money in. And then you show up to these events like the one in DC. I don't know if, the pictures I saw looked like it was hundreds of people, not thousands. And then I go like, you raised $100,000 for this? And then the money disappeared, right? So there's some weird stuff going on. And then on top of that, you get the fact that Angela came out like 2 weeks ago, and I don't know whether this is complete bullshit or real, but she said she was contacted by the FBI, who said that the LP has been either LP assets or the LP has been hijacked by like a foreign adversary or something, and they're investigating it. And she used this as some sort of thing to raise a bunch of money on. And I'm like, I mean, like, it's pretty obvious if you look at the signs.
How do you campaign off of that? How do you like? We've been told that our party's been hijacked by foreign adversaries. Give us money. Give us. Like,
I don't think it resulted in a big tick up in revenue for what it's worth. I think it was just misguided. So
I did see. Didn't they want to? I remember they wanted to host a second Rage Against the War Machine event, and they tried to fundraise for it, and they didn't get anything. I was checking they got like $5,000. They canceled it. I don't know if they gave back the money or they kept the money. I have no clue, but. They got like no money for it. Maybe it was, all of the attention had moved on, and, the people who actually cared about the war still care about the war, and the people who, was using it for aesthetic, peacenik purposes were, they've left. I don't know what it is, but this time around, it was a complete flop.
Yeah, I'm convinced that the Russian money dried up.
Do you really think that?
I mean, like, it was so suspicious, man. I've seen in the LP, we don't, it's not a fundraising juggernaut. It's never been. And the fact that this caucus gets founded, gets hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding, some of it accounted for through the FEC, some of it not. And then you get this rally that has all this money that then disappears.
Full of Russian propagandists.
Full of Russian propagandists. And then they do it again because, again, I'm genuinely convinced that there are people that are more powerful above the scenes here that are actually pulling the strings, not like as like some stupid conspiracy, but like the money is coming from someone that knows what they're doing. But the people in the situation are just incompetent. That's what I'm convinced on. So, that tracks with everything I've seen, right? If Roger Stone and Steve Bannon are trying to screw
the situation you're describing sounds like, I think the term would be useful idiot.
Exactly. You said it, not me, but yeah, I would say it. And it makes sense because, like, okay, well then, wow, I got all this money from this Rage Against War Machine rally, Dylan. Why not do it again? Let's do it again. Let's do it on our own. Let's make it happen. It worked so well last year when we got the nudge from the People's Party and the tankies and all these Russian propagandists to do it. Let's do it again on our own. And then we raised $5,000. They got to cancel it. So again, this is a suspicion, allegedly hyphenating all the stuff I'm talking about, but just the weird lines. It's incredibly suspicious. So incredibly so.
So the Libertarian Party, its membership is down. Its fundraising, as far as I know it, is down. It's
lost 50 state ballot access.
It's lost the 50 state ballot access that it was the only third party that could claim that before this. And it's now, I don't know how much work it's going to take to get that back if they start heading back in that direction. And now Trump's speaking at the convention. What was the final straw that made you finally either leave the party, like as an official apparatus, or just lose the label? What was the thing that ended up pushing you over the top?
So, I canceled giving to the party around the time of Rage Against War because of many of the things we discussed. I just saw it as like an abandonment of the values. the label's been more of a gradual thing. I'm going to just put it out this way. I am convinced that we are in the midst of a political realignment as a country and across the board. And this hasn't happened in, half a century. And I think that like a lot of people look at things in this left-right paradigm. Libertarians have for a long time seen themselves as kind of allies to the right. And they've thought of this for a long time because, think about the Cold War era. You've got this, you've got the Republicans kind of standing in opposition to the communists, right? And socialism, which is something that libertarians inherently very much dislike. What's happened over the last couple of years, though, is that there's been a rise of what I would objectively say is a very fascist type, at least at the very minimum, authoritarian movement on the right. Since 2016, honestly, I don't know where you stand on this, Dylan, but like Trump in 2016 to 2020 had a bunch of Reagan Republicans in his administration. He was doing a lot of shitty stuff. He didn't go full-blown authoritarian until January 6th, when it became clear to everyone that his intention was to stay in power as long as possible. Trying to seize voting machines, stop the steal rally, calling dude to pressure him for trying to get votes. So I don't think it was clear for a lot of people that Donald Trump and the right was becoming a really authoritarian. And there were things that they did that were authoritarian. Again, we talked about the BLM stuff earlier. But I think that this idea that libertarianism is natural allies with the right is just predicated on a completely outdated view of the world. So I think there's a realignment happening, and it's not left-right. It's between, do you believe in the liberal values that underpin Western civilization, or do you reject them? And for me as a libertarian who spent a lot of time dealing with the nuance of how these ideas apply, or I should say a liberal now, I'm willing to make a ton of concessions on the edges and the fringes of these little things that I believe, if it means that we can build a coalition of people that believe in basic liberal principles, like standing up for democracy, the rule of law. That should not be complicated. But I think that the divide in the next decade is going to become between liberals and illiberals, not like Republicans and Democrats. Because I think there are liberal Republicans. Now, they're not voting for Trump, but they exist, right?
I gotta say, I hate to interrupt you, but I think I just want to just throw out there, I think you might be onto something here, honestly. I think you might be on something here between the liberal and anti-liberal divide. Because there's a lot of, there was an interaction between, I think the streamer name is Destiny. I don't know if you've heard about him before.
Oh, yeah.
But he had an interaction with, it was Nick Fuentes, Andrew Tate, and all these other people in a Twitter space. And there was this moment where he was talking to them about like America and Americanism. And he got Nick Fuentes to come out and just say, I am anti-American. I believe the church should be in control. I believe only Christians should be able to run for high office. I am anti-American. And when I hear that, what I'm hearing to me is, I'm anti-democracy. I'm anti-freedom of expression. If it goes outside the church's discretion, I don't allow that. I'm hearing anti-liberalism while I see the type of people spouting the anti-liberalism and anti-Americanism, if you want to base it on the type of values that, at least the positive aspects of what our founding fathers were trying to advocate for, then this is not the type of stuff that should be draped in the red, white, and blue flag, and the type of stuff that should be outwardly rejected by anybody who wants to preserve the things that we really like about our country that differentiates it from other countries, like how staunch and steadfast our First Amendment rights are. Like the Republican candidate, which a lot of libertarians and this version of the Libertarian Party is pushing, is the same person who said that if you burn a flag, you should go to prison. The same person who said he wanted to open up the libel laws. That's not even talking about like blow up the families of terrorists, or just on the issue of speech, which is, I think, something that libertarians like. I remember the old Count Dankula story, like he had a pug to a Nazi salute and it made everyone freak out, like, oh my God, the cops went to his house, knocked, he gave him a big fine, this is terrible. And then another guy says, you burn a flag, go to prison. That's excusable as a libertarian. Like that seems like excusing a lot of like basic values to be able to say that while saying you're the pro-freedom guy, while saying you're the one in the coalition of freedom. And I'm seeing a lot more anti-liberal content creators and anti-liberal coalition building on the international stage. The stuff that really upsets me is seeing Viktor Orban trounced around as like a good European leader, and by the people who say they're going to take on the swamp. And so they decided to go with one of the most authoritarians, and I shit you not, has the country with the most public sector corruption in all of the EU, and this is the anti-swamp creature. This is your great alternative. It's the country that hates the EU while it needs the EU to sustain itself as a country. I mean, if there's a welfare queen in Europe, their name's Viktor Orban, and they're supposed to look at me with this guy and say you don't like him just because of the anti-liberal values, because that's why I feel like they like him. Because it isn't because of the anti-corruption. I don't think it's because of brilliant economic policy. I think it's the social values and the illiberalism, and that concerns me.
And maybe some of the racism. I mean, he's condemned multiculturalism, Orban race mixing, things like that. I genuinely think that's what it is. And this goes back to the whole horseshoe theory meme. Like, these forces, these are kind of like illiberal forces that reject like these very foundational principles of Western democracy and civilization. They exist on both extremes. It's the reason why you see Jackson Hinkle at a libertarian or at what we'd call this bastardized version of a libertarian rally. Right now, I know Jackson Hinkle considers himself left. I know a lot of people on the left hate that, whatever. But my point is, like, there is this very illiberal coalition forming. I think the response to Ukraine is actually like this whole thing in a microcosm. Like, do you think that an independent sovereign nation that wants to align with Western values and wants to have like individual liberty and freedoms, trade freely, and not be pushed around by a bigger authoritarian neighbor should be able to do that or not? Like, does might make right or not, right? And so that's literally my whole theory. And as somebody who spent so much time in this, I want to abandon the label because I think we need to come back to what liberalism means, and that should be the coalition that leads us in this next decade. And it's got to be among people that may disagree with me on tax policy. I don't care. Do you believe in free speech? Do you want to keep the rule of law and the peaceful transfer of power? Like, do you believe in democracy? I'm willing to abandon like all these these things on the fringes if we can just come to some basic consensus on like the defense of Western values. And
there's certain you can reform tax policy from administration to administration. There's certain institutions that, if you don't want it to be just a piece of parchment and nothing else, have to be vigorously defended. And as long as someone's willing to help vigorously defend institutions so we can pass these things to our children, because it's only a republic if you can keep it, then I'm willing to work with them in this manner. At least that's been my perspective.
No, and that's my entire point. And this is coming from somebody who's been the libertarian for a long time. One of the things that libertarians have is this urge to be like purist and like focus on, well, if you disagree with me on these two things, you're out. And I'm going that it's too existential at this point. We don't have that luxury. It's not Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama anymore. Okay, it's a status quo candidate like Joe Biden versus a guy who literally wants to make himself a dictator. He's praised Orban, says he's the model for America.
Can I say, what if somebody says that's fear mongering? Like, Donald Trump wants to make himself a dictator. He's the funny orange man. He calls Rosie O'Donnell fat. You're just a triggered libtard, fake libertarian coming on here with the gay warmonger Dylan Burns TV to spread this nonsense. What's going on here? Why are you lying about the Big D man?
I mean, like, here's the thing. I think that he is he's a goofball in the sense that he's like an entertainer, but that doesn't undermine the fact that, like, if you look objectively at his actions as a person, especially after he lost his election, he is engaged in absolute rejection of the Constitution and rejection of the rule of law. Could not think of a better example than everything that happened from once he lost to January 6th. And that's what changes the whole calculation for me. Libertarians want to say things like both sides are just as bad because, I mean, look at Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they would have done the same thing. And in many cases, you're right. I mean, like tariffs, they both are protecting tariffs. They both like try, they want to, restrict immigration. I mean, you could talk about the nuance, but he's proven that he has no respect for the Constitution or the rule of law. And the campaign he's running on now is not the campaign he ran on 2016. The campaign he's running on now is let me get revenge. You know, he's got people in his. You look at Heritage, and Heritage is becoming basically like the biggest machine to push this illiberal Orban-esque agenda. That's basically what they're doing.
It wrote up Project 2025. They've been a big campaigner against aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly my point. And that's the machine that's backing him right now. And I mean, you have to look at everything he's done. He might be a funny dictator, right? He might be a goofball, but like,
yeah, so was Sacha Baron Cohen, but I wouldn't choose him to be my leader.
Exactly. But I mean, he obviously has no respect for the rule of law, no respect for the Constitution, and he's willing to put everything. He has no principles. He's willing to put everything below his desire to retain control of power. And thank God that he failed. He only failed because of a couple different things that were out of his control. But you know, I don't think that's a non-starter for me. Like, there is just, you can't let somebody like that in your power again. And he's only made it worse. I mean, again, he's only gotten way more unhinged. And I think like these court cases he's involved in are proving that day by day. The guy's like a mafia boss that is constantly breaking the law to enrich himself and protect us. I mean, and he's using power to enrich his family. I mean, look at like the Saudi deal with Kushner after he left office.
Yep. I mean, that deal is so just suspicious from the head to the toe. I mean, you have to be a few pennies short of $1 to not see, like, I mean, he has no experience in this type of finance. He's a property guy before. And then the Saudi Foreign Wealth Fund, or I forget his foreign exchange fund, but foreign wealth fund, essentially, decides that they're going to give him $2 billion for this project he has no experience in capital financing. And they're going to give him this money after the Crown Prince personally intervened because the board said, this is a terrible idea. He has no idea what he's doing. And then the board intervenes and does it anyway. Just after the administration where Trump was the first U.S. president in history to visit Saudi Arabia as his first foreign visit. And Jared Kushner was his point man on Middle East affairs. It smells rotten.
It's every sign points towards absolute corruption and using his own personal power to enrich himself. And it's not even if it was left in enrichment, like, oh, I'm just trying to get rich off this, that'd be one thing. But it's not only that; it's paired with a complete blatant disregard for the rule of law and the Constitution,
and possibly serving a foreign country's interests over your own.
Exactly. And then you add that to, like, dude, this might be cringe to your audience, but when I was 18 and 20, it was the Tea Party movement. I watched the recession happen. I watched my friends lose their house. I got motivated by these concepts of, we need to follow the Constitution. We need limited government. We need, you know what I mean? And then to see all the people in this movement basically fold to this authoritarian orange man. And it's honestly, it's motivated by all these people because they just want to keep their jobs most of the time. Some of them have really malicious intent, but not all of them. I mean, like, it's been a wake-up call for me. I've realized that these forces, these riot adjacent forces, are incredibly destructive, and their cowardice is going to lead the country to what you said. I mean, a republic, if we can keep it, they're actively on the side of undermining it. And so, I don't know. I'm willing. I've had a come to Jesus moment in the last year or two. I'm saying that we need to build this coalition against that. I'm happy to partner with my Democratic friends. I'm happy to even partner with, progressives to some degree on, actually in many cases on this issue, if they're willing to embrace liberal values, the things that we talked about earlier. That's what we have to do. If we want our kids to have institutions.
Could you imagine John Kerry or Bush Sr. or any politician 20 years ago coming out and saying, I lost the election, so you should suspend the U.S. Constitution and just make me president again right now, and not immediately being laughed out of the room?
Well, I mean, dude, I was watching the Tea Party react to Obama, and they were telling me all the time that he was trying to terminate the Constitution and suspend it, and he was an authoritarian dictator and all that. And I'm like, dude, you've got one staring in your face right now, and you're coming to me and telling me to vote for him. It's absolutely insane. It just
Well, of course, but we do agree, of course, the president should never be held accountable for any crime and should have complete immunity to do anything while in office, of course. That's
right.
the reasonable that's the reasonable checks and balances. I'm a small government guy. I also think the president should be allowed to be an open criminal.
Yeah, going to the Supreme Court and arguing that Joe Biden should have the right to extrajudicially murder you, as like
We'll say it's a good way to get rid of your opposition.
That's what I said. I was like, if this court case goes the wrong way, which by the way, if it does, that's existential. Like, because that's basically saying that all future presidents will engage in unchecked criminal activity, like as a hard stop. I hope it doesn't go that way. But I mean, yeah, Joe Biden would be justified at that point in then launching a drone strike against Trump, right? And he wouldn't be able to face any repercussions. So it's just complete nonsense.
You could literally live stream on Twitch him drone striking his political opponents and nobody could do anything.
Exactly my point. Yeah. And I hope that the conservative majority Supreme Court sees that, although I've heard rumors that I think they're punting it back down to lower court. So maybe it won't even end up being a major moment like what a lot of people are thinking, but fucking crazy times, man.
I will say, if any serious legal mind looking at this should immediately disregard it, but in a period of, I mean, it's always been this to some degree, and I think people exaggerate it, but in the period of activism in the judicial system also, if people end up choosing activism or at least advancing the people who put them in that position's interests over the law of the land, keeping the legal system balanced, that's the type of stuff that worries me. There's no world where this court case should be decided the president holds a complete immunity while in the office, unless people are choosing their private political interests or the interests of the people who put them in that position through being, you can call it an activist judge, you can call it whatever you want, over defending the legal integrity of our judicial system.
And what a tragedy that would be for the future of the country if they end up doing something like that. I mean, it would be, those people would go down. I mean, honestly, those Supreme Court justices that vote for that ruling would go down in the history books as basically the beginning and the end. Major stakeholders in that. I hope that's not the case, Dylan. I have a little bit more faith in the Supreme Court that they won't, but I at this point, nothing would surprise me. I mean, it's been a crazy last couple of years. It's been insane.
So I wanted to bring us back to the Libertarian Party for a little bit. And I wanted to ask you, because the only time I really see the Libertarian Party is when I get invited to LibertyCon to speak, or when I see them on Twitter. And when I see them on Twitter, it's usually some local accounts. And some of the local accounts are okay, honestly. Like, some of them are fine. Some of them are ran by normal people. There's a lot of variety. It's almost like a Kinder Egg, but you could either get a tiny little treat or bird shit. It's like it's a real variety. And I mean, like, you already brought up like the New Hampshire account, and I don't want to like pick on the New Hampshire people because they do live in New Hampshire and that's penalty enough. But it does feel like I don't know what happened to their soft spot when they were a baby, but just like, oh, Hitler and Zelensky are like the same, and just like bizarre. It's, to me, it seems like it's purposefully attention grabby, and that's the only conclusion I can come to. And if that's the case, okay, but so was the guy in his underwear dancing at the Libertarian Convention in between the debates of whether people should have licenses to drive cars. That was also attention grabbing. But was that the reputation libertarians wanted?
No, I mean, I think I remember his name was James Weeks. I remember he used to be a guy from the kind of like, I'd say the Vermin Supreme type wing of the party, which we used to be around, but then they left. But they used to be a sizable chunk in like the 2010s. It is true. There is a lot of diversity in those things. But specifically the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire has gone on a tear, and the goal, I think, is to again create an environment that is welcoming to these kind of like neo-Confederate secessionists, neo-Nazi people. I mean, the commentary, like, they've gone and used a lot of like America First messaging. They told Nina Turner to go pick crops in Africa.
Yeah, that was pretty awful.
It was absolutely horrible. They've called like LGBTQ people groomers, and they've called to like shoot trans people, I think is what they called last week. So it's not even like even aligned with like
They said wait, they said what last week?
This is something about like it's ethical to like shoot trans people. Like check my work on that. They went on this whole thing about shooting trans people.
That's just that kind of I've heard a lot. That throws me for a loop a bit. You have to send me like a link or something after stream so I can read the exact quote.
Absolutely. And honestly, if you just go through to LPNH and just scroll, you'll see some of the most disgusting statements. But it's worth noting, Dylan, that this was like specifically the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, because they were so bad, and they remain so bad, that this was basically like they served as basically the catalyst for this takeover in a way. So in 2022, right before the Mises Caucus takeover, their chair of the Libertarian National Committee was a guy by the name of Joe Bishop Henchman. Joe Bishop Henchman was part of this Bleeding Heart crew. Like he was part of the guys I was telling you about, these kind of like professionals. He lives in DC. He works in tax policy. He's a very well-spoken guy. He wants to make the LP electoral force. He took over after Nick. When they started doing these things, I think the first tweet that really triggered everyone was this tweet that you may have seen, which was celebrating Meghan McCain crying over her dad.
Yeah, I remember that picture.
So they were celebrating this. It's something like, the tumor in John McCain's brain's done more to save lives than I don't remember. It was something.
Whose lives did it save?
I don't even. It was talking about how he's a warmonger, and the fact that it killed him kept people from dying.
I don't even if that's. Let's just give the assumption that John McCain was drawing up plans to invade Venezuela. How would him personally passing away change any? It didn't change the composition of Congress really that much. I mean, I don't know.
No, I mean the goal with this is to transform the libertarian identity. That's these people's goal. It's run by a guy by the name of Jeremy Kauffman, who is a complete like outright. He's like I don't know if this is the right term, but he's always talking about IQ and race. And he posted this meme the other day, or this picture the other day of a.
I'm happy they're choosing bipartisan topics like IQ and race. I think that polls #1 issue this session.
Yeah, exactly. That's his whole thing. That's his whole shtick. And he ran for governor of New Hampshire or something like that. And long story short, the goal for them is to transform what libertarianism is into this illiberal, like MAGA adjacent crew. So in 2022, the then chair, who was again part of this professional class Bleeding Heart crew, tried to basically make a decision where she was like, I'm pulling Twitter access from these people, and I'm taking it away from them because it's so egregious. It was right after this Meghan McCain tweet. And Joe Bishop Henchman at the LNC backed her up on that. And then the whole party, I don't know if you get you've spent a lot of time talking, or as you know, a decent amount of time talking to libertarians.
Yep.
They have this weird like rule following thing to the point that it's like they obsess over like perfect following of the rules. It's really odd for some people that like they obsess over like Robert's Rules of Order and things like that. For people that just like want to become ungovernable, they really obsess over like these little tiny details of the party. So this triggered this like meltdown across the country where they're like, the chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire is like unilaterally pulling control from these white supremacists, and that's against the rules and da-da-da-da. And sure, there may have been an argument that it was violating bylaws or whatever, but I mean, the context matters. And as soon as this was all overturned, because everyone turned on them, this whole thing failed. The Pragmatic Caucus, the chair of the LNC at the time, they all resigned. The Pragmatic Caucus dissolved. The Pragmatic Caucus was like the establishment controlling of the party. That's what they did for like 5-10 years. That was like kind of the base that kept everything
when
going.
I think about it, at a party like the DNC or the RNC, there's real institutional power there. So when you lose something like this that might even make you sick to your stomach, there's a motivation to keep you there because you know there's like lives at stake. But when you're trying to build a political movement at the Libertarian Party, I feel like a lot more people would feel comfortable to just tap out and be like, it's not like we hold the governorship here or this here, so why should I dedicate my movement to dedicate my time to a movement that is going down this path? It feels like it'd be harder to use leverage to motivate them to stay with power because there's not really any power to go around.
No power, no money, right? I mean, there's a couple of staffers. So they're basically none now, but there were before. But even the chair was unpaid. I was a chairman of the state party of the Libertarian Party of Tennessee. It was the worst job I ever had. I literally spent tens of thousands of dollars to travel across the state on my own dime, and that's the nature of these positions. So yes, like, why would you stick around for that when your identity is being co-opted by these people that are making you look bad and they're making national news? Like, I get it. They left. And what happened was this void filled in the party because all these pragmatic people just basically said, I'm out. I'm not going to associate with this anymore now that they're able to keep control of this. And that's what really helped escalate the takeover in 2022, which happened later, a couple months later. And then it's led us to this point. There's all the money factors that we talked about earlier, but like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire specifically sits at like the center of this whole strategy that they have. And the strategy is effectively this. It's just piss in the pool until the pool has enough piss in it that everyone gets out. And then as soon as they get out, you have control over the pool. That's the strategy.
Who doesn't want control of the piss pool?
That's what they've got, man. They've got their no 50 state ballot access. They've got basically no candidates. They've got a huge hundreds of thousands of dollars in liability.
Man, the laws of the 50 state ballot access must be particularly crushing, because I remember I would judge third parties based off of that and that alone, almost. Like when I would be like, how much ballot access do you have? 1? Okay. And then I don't have to talk about you anymore. I don't need to listen to you anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, because at least you have ballot access, you can have an impact on elections. Presumably, you could run a candidate that could presumably actually win because they can be on the ballot, and you're not doing some crazy impossible writing campaign because you just need those more institutional barriers for third-party candidates. Losing that must have been particularly crushing.
Well, and it's worth noting that is not a small feat. Like, that's a multi-million-dollar effort over decades to achieve that, right? So they haven't lost it in every state. They've lost it in a handful of states. I want to say they'll probably have between like 42 and 48 states. But it's one of those things that if you don't have revenue coming in or the infrastructure or the staff to maintain it, that's very expensive. Because once you lose it, like in a state, like I could like just give you an example. A state like Tennessee, if you lose ballot access, if you've had it, you have to then basically start from square one, and you have to spend a ton of money to get signatures, like 10 times as much to get it again. And the way these laws are written is you get ballot access, and then you have to retain it in many states by getting a percentage of the vote. So in Tennessee, you have to get like, 40, 50,000 signatures to get it. And then you have to get 5% in a statewide race. If you don't, then you have to go do the signatures all over again. And every signature costs money. Every single one of them, whether it's labor or direct, you're paying people to do that. And so no revenue, no one, I mean, like, dude, I can't even tell my mom to go look up the Libertarian Party anymore. I'm not going to go promote this. I did this for a decade. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to tell people to look that up. I'm not going to use that brand. People are not, it's going to escalate. So this year they may lose 2. But next cycle, they'll probably lose 4 to 6. And then the cycle after that. And then this is how it happens. And then if you add the misappropriation of funds that's going on with all this stuff and all this.
How bad is the misappropriation of funds?
Well, 10% of all the money coming into the party right now, roughly, is going straight into Angela McArdle's bank account. She hired her like domestic partner.
Okay,
as the
I'm sorry.
director
I didn't mean to laugh. That's just.
I'm curious, one of every, 10 cents on every dollar you give to the LP goes to Angela McArdle right now. And the way it works out is because she hired her boyfriend as basically
as you do in any serious political movement, as you do.
Yeah, it's like he's like, I think if not the highest paid, like one of the top 2 or 3 highest paid staffers in the party.
Oh, that's great. You hired your boyfriend and made them one of the top paid staffers.
Yeah.
As you do.
Yeah. And so and he's apparently doing development work to get donors. And we already talked about the revenue numbers. So he's one of the highest paid staffers. He's living with her. I assume, have a shared bank account. Maybe I'm wrong. They have a kid together. So I don't know. And then the party's collapsing with revenue. So it's just an extraction game. But that's not even the whole picture. It's like this whole contract with the hotel. If they don't hit the room block minimum, as somebody who's negotiated these contracts, like if you don't hit that, there's a liability. You've got to spend X amount of money. So if you don't have money set aside to pay your liability for these contracts, then you'll theoretically go into litigation because you're not meeting your obligation, right? That's one thing. With the hotel that's coming up, and that's a big deal.
The hotel for the convention?
Yeah, which is, by the way, it was set up during Joe Bishop Henchman's chairmanship when they were planning, because the trajectory of the party
Wait,
at the
are you
time was
telling me
great.
his last name was Henchman?
His last name is Henchman. We always
Okay.
called ourselves the Bishop's Henchman. It's two names. It's Joe Bishop Henchman, which is like a compound name. I think his husband's Bishop, and then they merged the names. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But Joe Bishop Henchman. Yeah, and so they negotiated this contract at the Washington Hilton, where they have the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's a beautiful space.
Wow.
It's not a cheap hotel. Because the party was on a trajectory, man, when they negotiated this contract. But the contract's been negotiated. They've got it. They've collapsed membership. They can't meet those thresholds. And then you add all that to just the weird, the poor financial reporting, and then you could get hit with litigation from the hotel, FEC fines, and that's what happened from what I understand, with the Reform Party. I mean, they just got themselves in such a conundrum with the FEC. They got hundreds of thousands of fines. It literally took them 20 years to build out of it. So they can't do the operational work that is needed to continue the ballot access game. And that's the only thing that matters in a third party. The only thing that matters is, can you retain ballot access?
I mean, people would talk
else,
about, when people talk about parties, it was Democrats, Republicans, and if they ever mentioned anything else, it was Libertarians. Maybe Greens, but it was Libertarians usually.
Yeah.
If you don't have 50 state ballot access, I mean, why we even mention Libertarians?
I don't know about you, but there's a psychological thing to be said about that. So if you don't have a viable path to victory on all 50 state ballots, people just write you off. You said it earlier, like, oh yeah, third party. Okay, what are you in 5 states? Like, I don't give a shit. That is a psychological thing that will just destroy their party's ability to get voters, assuming they can ever dig themselves out of this. And listen, there are competent people right now running to take the party back. The Classical Liberal Caucus, run by a good friend of mine named Jonathan Casey, who I think was on your show at some point in the past.
I believe so. Or I was on his show, one of the other.
Yeah, I know you and I talked a couple times in that context as well. But like, they are doing that, but the damage is going to be long term, because it's not only damage from the ballot access side and the financial side, but it's brand identity damage. Like, if you could tell an entire generation of Gen Z, which I think if polling shows 70% of them associate with the left, over 70%, that the Libertarian Party is the MAGA party, you're dooming yourselves for 10 or 20 years. You know what I mean? You're not going to grow. You're not going to have inroads to these.
And you're never going to be able to out MAGA. This is the thing that I don't get, is why do MAGA and kind of watered down with like a weird freedom twist, but kind of a freedom twist, because you're going with the guy who says suspend the Constitution. Because if you give somebody like a choice between like Coke and Diet Coke, they're gonna go for Coke every time.
I don't get it either. It's strategically completely nonsensical. I mean, you need to carve a third lane, not like try to be like, hey, I'm just like a cooler version or a different version of this guy. You're building your entire identity off of your opposition, which is a terrible decision. But again, as I said, I don't think it has anything to do with trying to make smart strategic decisions. I think it has everything to do with the intent to co-opt the identity of libertarianism in order to help Trump win. So, I mean, that's my theory. I'm sticking with it.
Well, then I got a few dreary, bleak questions to wrap this up. The first one is the Libertarian Party dying?
So I think the answer to that question is yes. Even if the good people at the Classical Liberal Caucus are able to wrest control, as we talked about earlier, the trajectory is very bad, because they're going to spend a lot of time paying off financial liability and digging and building out the institution again, which will put them back 10 or 15 years. So the answer to that question is definitely yes. I don't know if you want to throw another one at me.
The second one would be, how fast is it bleeding out?
That remains to be seen. The one thing that I haven't seen is the financial reports that are. I mean, obviously we're in the middle of May, right? And all this stuff hit in the last 7 days. I will tell you that I have heard debate and frustration even within their own allies on this. I have a feeling that it's going to escalate their decline in membership. And I mean, as you mentioned, Donald Trump's a Republican Party nominee. They're not going to get an influx of Republican Party donors that now want to become libertarians. They're not. That's not how this works. So I have a feeling that, and as we talked about, revenue 30 years low.
I mean, like, what would at this point, what is the benefit of becoming a card holding libertarian member? For me as a Democrat, the main reason why I'm signed with the party is because I want to participate in the primary process, because I want to put forward candidates who might actually hold office, by the way, in the Democratic Party, who are more aligned with my values. But if you don't have 50 state ballot access and you're already a party whose the odds of your candidate winning are basically next to nil, like, what's the purpose of participating in a primary where you don't even have ballot access?
Well, and even in states where they do have ballot access, there's not even like a statewide primary. So the value was always like this membership program. That was the idea. It was like, in states where you can register as a libertarian, like Iowa, for example, they did have a caucus type thing to pick their candidate, but it was very small. But it did exist. But the value to be a dues paying member was you get this identity thing. It's like, I get a card in the mail. I get to tell people I'm a libertarian. I get a bumper sticker to throw in my car. I get this news delivered to me every month talking about all the wins we've got across the country. That identity has been undermined. The value of the membership is gone. They killed the news, the little LP news. The card that they used to send out, that's gone. They actually sent out a version of it after discontinuing for 8 months, and it was like this really shitty piece of paper that they like printed the word libertarian.
You want to know when I'll be able to announce that it's officially dead? Once they replace it with digital cards. Once it's a digital card where it just does a little animation, it's officially dead.
A little Trump dancing, a little Trump dancing.
A little
Yes,
a little Vivek and a little Trump.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know how fast, but I will tell you it'll become very clear soon what the financial impact of this is. I have a feeling that it's going to escalate things because the trajectory line was already so bad. Like, I think it's probably going to get worse.
How much of this blame do you think falls at the feet of the Libertarian Party leadership, specifically, number one, the Mises Caucus, and number two, the current chairman?
Well, I mean, it all is inherently, by the nature of her leading it, she is responsible for the outcomes of her administration, whatever, if you want to call it that. Like that's her job. She failed at her job. Not only failed, epically failed, and completely destroyed the party. I think that the real blame does lie in the organization that made this happen, though, which is that LP Mises Caucus group, which, by the way, they hate the actual words of Mises. Somehow they bastardized like his identity. It's actually a tragedy because like Mises was a pretty classically liberal dude, and they're out there promoting like neo-Confederate bullshit. But yeah, I mean, I think that the blame really does lie in more in the Mises Caucus, because Angela, as I've said on the show, looking at the way she runs things, I get the vibe that she's just kind of incompetent. But the people that put her there, people like the chair of the Mises Caucus, Michael Heiss, and the people that are funding that, those are the people that I think hold the most blame in this situation. And it's worth noting that after all the results that you and I talked about on this call, they're backing her again. They're backing her again. They've endorsed her again. So it's clear that they don't have the best interest of the party in mind. So take that as you may.
What would it take to get the Libertarian Party back on track and to start rebuilding towards 50 state ballot access, showing people that, they're taking this seriously and they're not trying to get other parties' candidates elected, they're trying to get their own candidates elected? What would it take?
I think the party needs to do a couple things, but and I'd like to touch on this before we close the show. Like, I think that people that believe in the values that I think you and I have, like, I think you and I are probably closer than maybe me or like the Mises Caucus. I mean, like, I consider myself
I would hope so. I would hope so.
Like a lot. Well, I guess the point I'm going for is like you're a Democrat. Libertarians typically are very opposed to this idea of like partnering with Democrats. It's because we consider ourselves right aligned. I see Democrats as like our natural allies right now. They have to be. And I'll get to that in a minute. But to answer your question, like there's real serious brand damage that's been done. Like real serious brand damage that's been done. They're gonna have to. I think the party should rebrand. I think the party should. Well, first of all, they've got to kick everyone out of leadership. But looking at the trajectory, it looks like they're gonna play some games at the convention to try to like keep themselves in power. to try to like block credentialing, which is a whole nother conversation. They need to elect competent leaders again, people that care. The issue is that a lot of these people that could have solved the problem have been driven out, fired, or maligned. So, I mean, I think the party at the minimum needs to do a complete and comprehensive rebrand. That's something that does need to happen. I think the best way to fix this problem, if you want to talk about the operational infrastructure of the party, would be for every single state affiliate in the country to disaffiliate from the national committee and just let them float out on their own and reassociate with a new national committee, which could be done very easily, and you could retain ballot access. And that national committee carries all the financial liability of the decisions that they made. And then there's a new national committee that organizes these individual state parties that are all operating independently under a new organization. So
you basically let the national party sink and just start building a new boat.
Yeah, exactly. Create a new national committee, which, by the way, there is already an organization that's doing this. The Liberal Party of the United States is a federally recognized like national party. There already have been 4 or so states that have disaffiliated and reassociated with the Liberal Party. Some of them have Liberal Party branding. Some of them have Libertarian Party branding because it's very hard to like change, like for ballot access purposes. Like if you get ballot access under the Libertarian Party, to change that to another party name is very difficult. So they're just it's a very messy thing. But like in the long run, I would encourage every state affiliate to disaffiliate, reaffiliate, in my preference, with the wonderful people that are running and building this Liberal Party. But that's a long game. My proposal for people that actually care about like liberal values is what we need to do is we need to find a way. I started a political PAC last year that's called Project Liberal, and the goal of this whole project is to basically.
By the way, I was told I was going to be sent a pin, and I was never sent a pin. So I do want to say that.
Are you a donor? Did I miss that?
No, but somebody said I was going to be sent a pin anyway.
I will get you a pin in the mail.
I was getting recruited. I was getting groomed.
I will give you a pin. I will personally make sure you get a pin this week. I will talk to the team and get that shipped.
Gotcha. I'll make it as difficult as possible. I'll give you a frontline mailbox.
That's good. That's good. I'm in. I'm happy to do whatever it takes. But I mean, the idea is this. Like, I think that as we talked about earlier, we need to recenter around what liberal values are. We need to find a way to organize outside of the 2-party, 3-party, 4-party system. And the thing that we're working on right now is trying to find a way to basically build a scorecard that ranks candidates not on these minutia policy disagreements, but on their broad commitment to liberal principle. And what we want to do with this is we want to find a way to show both out of Republicans and Democrats, how committed are you to liberal principles? And then we want to spend money of the PAC to back those candidates. And what that means is backing candidates that might be very different when it comes to policy nuance. But if you have a broad commitment to classically, or, to liberal values, to, freedom of speech, the rule of law, the Constitution, free trade, like if you believe in those basic ideas, then we need to create a coalition to organize people there. And so that's my whole theory is like, we need to abandon, like I'm personally pushing to say, just get out of you're siloing yourself into a party it's basically like getting on a ship that's sinking. Get off the ship, build a new ship, make it a bipartisan ship, and focus on building a coalition that can kind of stand as a force against these kind of very extreme forces that are taking us down the path to like real dangerous times. So
what would you say to the people who believe that, much like the slaves that were buried with the Egyptian pharaohs, you should go down with the ship here?
Okay. I mean, I legitimately am not going to waste. Okay, I will say I say sometimes, because for me, by the way, Dylan, it's kind of been an emotional experience for me, because it's been like watching a child die. I mean, that's a really extreme example, but like I've spent so much time.
1 second. Thumbnail artists, get on that. I'm watching the libertarian baby die. Let's put that up there.
I mean, like that's basically where I've been, man. I've spent 10 years trying to build an electoral force, and I'm watching all of that go to shit right now. And so for me, it's been very difficult to watch that, because I'm like, listen, all I wanted was a viable electoral alternative. That's all I wanted. And that is farther away now. And a lot of the people that are brought to libertarianism, I'm like, I almost want to call them and apologize, because I'm like libertarianism is not MAGA. It's not. It's the opposite of that. So no, I'm not going to go down with the ship. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to build something that is viable, that can build a coalition that can help us defend these kind of liberal principles in this really historic time. And I'm hoping that as this political realignment happens in the country, we can serve an important role to contextualize what liberalism means in electoral politics, because there's just no one else that's really doing that right now. There's all these different niche groups that are focused on partisan interests. And I think that like our team, kind of because of our background in this space, we can look at things that we can say, like we don't want to look at it through a partisan lens. We want to look at it through a values lens. And if you believe in liberal values, we want to build a coalition with you. And if you don't, then we want to fight you. And so that's the whole model. And for me, I think that's actually far more viable. Like I think that has a lot more longevity. I think that could actually serve a legitimate electoral force that's meaningful. Whereas when the libertarians, you look at what they've done, I mean, don't get me wrong, they've gotten some people elected to state houses across the country. We had Justin Amash in Congress for a period, and I like Justin. But I mean, what are the outcomes that they've created? They've rolled back some local regulation, right? Like we're dealing with an existential crisis, and so we have to rethink our place. And so that's my maybe hopeful message is at least I know your audience isn't all libertarians, but at least for people even in your audience, I that are Democrats, that's I think what we have to do to fight against these kind of extremes and against MAGA, which is a really big threat right now. So
yeah, my audience is mostly red pillars. I think we're all in the we're trying to get the girl, we're trying to woo them. That's what we're doing.
Andrew Tate stance. Is that the idea?
Yeah, just a little bit less sex trafficking. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. We're just sexist, not monsters.
Okay, good. You got it. All right.
But thank you so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything you want to shout out before you head out?
No, I mean, I'll give my plug. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Eckel. If you're interested in any of the things I just said, you can go to projectliberal.org and follow us on Twitter, Project Liberal. We'd love your support. If you join as a member, you have a voice in the org. So if the values I mentioned, if this value proposition is interesting to you, I'd love to have you join the project. And we're building this out. We're 6 months in, and so far you're seeing some crazy results. So we'd love to have your support. And Dylan, huge fan. Thank you for everything that you do. And thanks for giving me the time to maybe vent a little bit to you about my dead baby.
I appreciate it, okay? Don't worry. Many people in many relationships have survived miscarriages. You have a great one.
You too, buddy. Talk to you soon.
See you later. Bye-bye.